Call It Femicide is the title of a new report that offers a chilling picture of violence against women in this country. It was issued by the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability, a research center based at the University of Guelph that's taken up the call from the United Nations to document the state of gender-based killings. And its findings for Canada are shocking. Joining us now for more in Beachburg, Ontario via Skype, JoAnne Brooks, Center Director of the Women's Sexual Assault Center of Renfrew County. In Peterborough, via Skype, Lavell-Harvard, President of the Ontario Native Women's Association and the Director of the First People's House of Learning at Trent University. And in our studio, Farrah Khan, Manager, Consent Comes First, Sexual Violence Support and Education at Ryerson University, and she's also a member of the Government of Canada's Federal Strategy Against Gender-Based Violence Advisory Council. And Samra Zafar, human rights activist and the author of the forthcoming book, A Good Wife. Welcome. Welcome to you all in studio, and also to JoAnne and Dawn. Hi. Before we start the conversation, I think, Dawn, I want to get an understanding, a definition of what femicide is.
So working within the observatory, the definition, there is a little bit of variation internationally, but fundamentally it's about the killing of women based on gender, this killing of women because they're women. So we're talking about intimate partner violence, we're talking about domestic violence, family violence, misogyny, typically sexual violence. So it's the most extreme version of that spectrum that begins with violence against women and ends, unfortunately, with femicide, typically perpetrated by males, but there are some lesser instances of women who are killing other women in the name of honor killing and things like that.
And I should say, Dawn, you were a part of a panel of experts that worked on that report. JoAnne, did you want to add anything to that definition of what femicide is?
I think that was really comprehensive, and I think that really covers the whole spectrum for me.
Farrah and Samra, would you like to add anything to that?
I think the part that really is upsetting about femicide, or that we're seeing the conversation, is we're naming it instead of just calling murder, right? Because I think people oftentimes will just call it murder, and we're asking with this report and with a lot of violence against women organizations are saying, call it femicide, recognize the gendered implications of it, and why people are choosing to murder, police, persecute, and punish women.
When did the term femicide start to take on significance in Canada?
Well, it's been taken on significance for a long time, and there's other femicide reports that exist. So this is the first one that's a national one. We have one in Ontario that's done by Dr. Mavis Morton from the Guelph University with OAITH, the Ontario Association of Interval and Transitional Housing. And they put out one about Ontario for a number of years, and it's been documenting the ways in which women are murdered. There's also the Death Review Committee of Ontario, which sounds very ominous, and is, and it actually looks at how these murders of women, these femicides, are predictable and preventable. And it's important to name that piece too, is that femicide is usually predictable and preventable because it's usually connected to intimate partner violence.
And predictable and preventable, I want to go more into that. But when this report came out, were you surprised by the number?
No. No, and as someone who monitors it, I think many of us in the movement, when we see a newspaper article come out that doesn't specifically say femicide, but there was like a triple homicide or, a husband and wife murder-suicide, we instantly go to what were the details. Oh, she was just about to leave him, or they were in consistent fights, or there was a history of isolation and financial abuse. So when we see that, we notice it. So many of us in the movement have been saying this for a very long time, that our governments need to take larger action and urgent action on these issues.
We want to get into more on that, but first let's take a look at what came out in the report. And this report, Call It Femicide, focused on 2018 deaths reported by the media, and it concluded a woman or girl is killed every 2.5 days in Canada. At least 148 women and girls' lives were ended by violence, and here in Ontario, 65 of those murders were in Ontario. I wanted to start with you, Samra, but I want to ask this question to all of you. If you were to pick one societal factor that you think is largely contributing to these numbers, what would it be?
I always say that the biggest factor is fear of isolation. And in all my work as a speaker and as an activist, I get hundreds, if not thousands, of messages from women, not just in Canada, but all over the world, who are impacted by domestic violence or gender-based violence. And the fear of isolation and rejection and shame and stigma.
Like isolation from your friends and family.
Exactly.
If you were to leave this partner.
If I leave, I will be rejected. If I leave, I will be shunned by society. I will be shamed. I will be isolated. And so it's isolation that occurs within the relationship. Like everyone mentioned, it's a spectrum. It's not something, it's not a slap and a kick that happens the next day. It usually leads up from verbal, emotional, financial abuse, and a lot of it is propagated by the isolation that's created by the abuser. So the woman's already feeling, pretty alone. And then there's another fear of isolation. Now, if I leave, I will lose this person as well, and I'm going to be all alone. And that is what keeps women going back and forth. And, on average, a woman would leave 6 to 7 times before she finally leaves. And in my own story, I left about 5 times before I finally left because of that fear, like, where am I going to go from here?
I want to talk to you more about your own personal story, but I want to ask the same question to you, Dawn. When you look at these numbers, what would you say is one of the societal factors that's contributing to so many women being murdered by somebody that they know?
So I think fundamentally this is about patriarchy. This is about the notion that women are property, that women should remain in their place, that they need to be respectful to their man.
But somebody would hear that, not to cut you off, but somebody might hear that and think this is 2019. How is that still happening in 2019? Isn't that something 100 years ago?
We would like to say so, but we are still living with that legacy of thousands of years of men thinking women need to be kept in their place, that they must be subservient. And you would be shocked at actually just how rampant that still is in society. But when you connect that then with the inequality, the economic vulnerability of women, where, as was just mentioned, if they don't have equal pay, if they don't have equal access to financial resources, unfortunately, that's how women are very vulnerable and can't leave. That's how men keep control. And then when they start to lose control, that's when the ultimate form of violence happens, which is the femicide. As we've seen very often, it's precisely that moment when the woman has the courage to leave that this happens.
And JoAnne, you live in a rural area. What would you say is a societal factor that may contribute to these numbers?
What I hear from women for the past 26 years is here in our area, it's extremely difficult to leave because everyone knows everyone else and everyone is related to everyone else in our area. And so kinship ties are very important. And the messages about who you are as a woman, the bed that you've made, and then you're going to lie in it forever, is just so stringently adhered to here in this culture, and not just here, but in rural Canada for sure. That becomes a huge issue. Women are torn. They want to be safe. They don't feel safe, but where do they go? And I think that's what Dawn was talking about as well. And the economic poverty. The median income for women here in Renfrew County is about $25,000. And we have very poor housing conditions, no public transportation. So how do women leave? Where do women go? Exactly those same messages here.
So it sounds like femicide is not, when we speak about domestic violence, it's maybe not just the physical aspect of it, but it's the emotional, the economic abuse, as it has been mentioned. Farrah, what would you say is something else that's contributing to these numbers?
Well, I think it's also the way the public reacts. When a survivor hears stories in the media about a woman and their community around them shames and blames that woman for being in that relationship, or shames and blame women for taking on social assistance or using public housing or requesting services, we oftentimes do. We blame the victim. And when that happens, it tells other people around them that they shouldn't reach out, that they can't trust you with their story. So we also have to get better as a society to recognize the signs of abuse, to support our friends when they disclose, and also recognize that survivors are always in the room, because sometimes we forget that. And I think another factor of it is that we don't recognize this in policy. And so when we see public policy that cuts social assistance, when we see public policy that doesn't invest in childcare. What we're actually making sure is that women will be able to leave because they financially cannot.
We'll get more into the policy as well, but I wanted to talk about some of the women who in Ontario who were murdered this past year. There were more than 6 women that were killed in our province last year. And the pictures you see on the screen right now include women of all backgrounds, ages, ethnicities. But JoAnne, as we know, as the research shows, even as different as the women look, there are things that they have in common. And what are those things that they have in common that put them at a higher risk of femicide?
Well, I think it goes back to a little bit about what Farrah says, in that there's a lot of societal permission and shaming and blaming of victims. So I think those are very common issues. Women have messages from around them that indeed you have made this choice and then you're going to have to figure your way out of it. I know for us here, that is really one of the common things. There's a lot of fear as well. I know that after the 3 women were murdered here in Renfrew County on September 22nd, 2015. We heard from a lot of women who said that their partners were telling them that if they chose to speak out or even try to leave, that they would pull a Barutsky, which was the murder of those women. So there's a lot of fear because of the perpetrator's messages to them. And again, when you cut social programs, when you cut panels on violence against women that are experts, that can inform government and can inform the world, basically, that really puts women at risk for violence.
You brought up what happened in Renfrew County in 2015. I wanted to talk to you about it later, but I'll just talk about it now. I was reading an article that said that Natalie, one of the victims, that she actually rented a panic button, and she wore a panic button because she was that afraid of the man who ended up killing her. But he was walking around unsupervised, not monitored. But when you looked at his background, he had a lot of criminal charges. So what does that say about the system then? If she's wearing a panic button to protect herself from him, but he's walking freely without being monitored, even though he has done these things in the past.
Right. And I think there's 2 things there. One of the things here is that most programs are funded by population, not by geography. So in our vast landmass, someone could wear a panic button, but in reality, it could take police more than an hour to reach them if they needed help.
If you live in a rural area?
Pardon me?
If you live in a rural area.
Yes, yes. And our whole area really is rural. So that's a big challenge. Our programs are underfunded, and so we don't have the resources necessary to be as supportive of women as we would like to be. So that's an issue. My understanding from that particular case was that Barutsky had met the threshold of all of the charges. Sometimes charges were withdrawn for lots of reasons. Perhaps the biggest one was fear. So his charges were never at a federal level, and that's my understanding. So the fact that he wasn't monitored wasn't an issue from the law. So that has been something that has been marked. That's what needs to be addressed. That's what needs to be identified as needing change.
Well, looking at the report, the It Femicide report, one of the trends that it identified is that where the crimes are taking place is significant. While 59% of the femicide victims lived in urban areas, it's the rural demographic that's overrepresented. Rural victims made up 34% of the women who were killed, yet only 16% of the population lives in rural areas. So what needs to be done to, I guess, address that discrepancy?
We've had opportunity to do a lot of focus groups with women more recently since the murders, just to ask, what is it that would make a difference in this community? And 2 things that came forward were public education, to get out to schools, to get out to early childhood education teachers, to just educate the public about what is violence against women and how, as bystanders, we can intervene. Because the minute that violence against women is taken away from the social conscience, it's well forgotten. So that's one of the huge pieces that women have said. The other thing is that they wanted more services for them, that they can come in privacy and confidentiality to speak about what it is that they need, and then to make plans to have a better life for themselves, however that shape looks. But we just truly don't have that many resources here, based again on population.
And Dawn, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, one of the things you were talking about was the public education aspect. And something that a lot of people don't understand is that very often it takes a woman several times. I know somebody's mentioned 6 or 7. We've seen very often some like 11 to 17 times before the woman will stay gone and will remain away from the partner for all kinds of reasons. We mentioned the financial, there's family guilt, there's people saying, if you have him charged, then that's ruining his life, and now he can't help pay the bills, and now you and the children are out in the streets. Like these things have such larger impacts. But there's also the problem of community fatigue, that whether it be police or whether it be other family members and friends, if they've called, there's this attitude of, we've already been to that home 5, 6, 10 times, and she never presses charges, or she always goes back. So then there becomes, at a time when things are escalating and police or family and friends should be responding more quickly, they are actually taking it less seriously because of this notion that, well, she always takes him back, so maybe it's not that serious, or it's just literally fatigue, response fatigue. So at a time when they should be responding faster, they're actually not taking it as seriously, and that's when that's when these kind of tragedies happen, when you actually have the actual femicide.
And we hear the numbers. We might see a flash of someone who's been killed by their partner. But I just want to ask you one more question, JoAnne. For the community in Renfrew County, these are 3 people that were taken from the community, 3 people taken from their families. What has the impact been like to that community with the loss of their lives?
My sense is that the community is forever changed, because here, while we only have 107,000 people spread over a landmass larger than Prince Edward Island, everyone is connected somehow to everyone else. So the loss of Natalie and Anastasia and Carol that morning will have impact forever, and especially women. Women and girls have come forward in huge numbers to talk about that's their story. It could have been their story. They knew those women. So I think that we are forever changed. One of the things that surprised me after being an advocate for 26 years was that we held vigil at the courthouse every time the accused made an appearance. We were asked to do so by family members, and we held signs up about violence against women. And we usually in our community, men are silent. They don't participate, or there's a lot of jeering and negative comments. However, after the murders of the women, we've noticed a lot more men are stepping up to become allies who want to know how they can be better bystanders. So that's been a shift and a surprise in a good way.
Let's go back to the report again. And another trend that the Call It Femicide exposed is that Indigenous women are overrepresented in femicide. They make up 36% of the women killed, but they only make up less than 5% of the population in Canada. Dawn, what's the difference between Indigenous and other racialized women who are also killed in greater numbers in terms of the risk of violence they face, and also from whom?
Mm-hmm. So Indigenous women are living their lives at the intersection of racism and sexism. So in Canada, the patriarchy and colonization that brought over this notion that women are inferior, that men should be superior. When you combine that with the racism that says, Indigenous people are inferior or even subhuman based on colonization, then you've created an entire population of prey where Indigenous women are the perfect prey for somebody who is looking for violence. We've heard from the girls on the streets, unfortunately, that those kind of men who are looking for violent sexual encounters are deliberately seeking out Indigenous women because they also know that given the racism in society, there's less chance that anybody's going to go looking, that these attitudes that it was just another Indian chick, she chose to put herself at risk by being out in the streets. Also that there's less chance that they will ever be charged, less chance that they will ever see justice. And unfortunately, looking at the patterns in Canadian history and justice, it's very true that it's very unlikely that they will ever see justice. And that's what the National Inquiry, all of those families, all of the stories are beginning to show. But then you also compound that with the economic vulnerability. We know that Indigenous people and Indigenous women specifically are the poorest of the poor in Canadian society because of that history of colonization. So when you combine the racism, sexism, and economic vulnerability, you have a perfect storm that makes Indigenous women much, much more likely to be victims, not only of intimate partner violence, but also, random stranger, acquaintance, and or serial killers in this country.
And that, I think, is one of the differences, because in the report for other women, it's usually somebody that they know or somebody in their family. But for Indigenous women, it could be a stranger as well. Did that surprise you, Dawn?
Unfortunately, no, it didn't surprise me because that's what we've heard, from the women on the streets. That's what we've been hearing in the work we're doing with Indigenous women for decades now, is specifically that our women are targets. They are the perfect prey because those predators out there who are looking to commit these kind of violent acts because of their misogynistic attitudes, because of their hatred of women, are deliberately seeking women that they know there will be less action, less outcry, and less chance that they will ever be caught.
We're having a discussion and we're trying to figure out maybe some solutions or even just to raise awareness of the issue. How, as a society, can we help heal the intergenerational trauma that contributes to the re-victimization of Indigenous women across this country?
So I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier today is this is about education. This is about, when having this conversation, when we talk about economic vulnerability, when we looked at the RCMP reports on the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women, they very often looked at those women, what is it about them that is making them victims? And comments about Indigenous women living a high-risk lifestyle. And yes, Indigenous women are high risk, but not because they've chosen a high-risk lifestyle. They're high risk because when you are born into a First Nation community that is living in third world conditions with no hydro, with no roads to leave the community. There is no buses. You can't get a taxi out of a fly-in community. So when the rest of society doesn't recognize these third world conditions that Indigenous people are living in, the lack of resources, and the fact that, yes, our women are high risk, but not because they chose that, because they've been born high risk when you're living in third world conditions in the middle of one of the richest countries in the world. So this is a situation where we have to address the economic situation of Indigenous women, but also the economic situation of Indigenous people generally, but also that education so that we don't have the racism compounding the problem when people look at Indigenous women and say, she shouldn't have been out hitchhiking. She shouldn't have been on the streets. No Indigenous young woman, no girl dreams of growing up and being on the streets. That's a lack of opportunity because of centuries of colonization. And we're still experiencing that legacy. And it doesn't go away in 3 years of Justin Trudeau government.
More policy. We'll get into the policy in a little bit, but I really wanted to talk to Samra because you actually have a personal connection to domestic violence. And I understand this is pretty difficult to talk about, and we appreciate you being able to come on the show and talk about it.
Thank you.
Can you take us through your story, please?
Yes, absolutely. So I was born in Pakistan. I grew up in Abu Dhabi. And then at the age of 16, I was told by my parents that I'm going to get married to a man who lives in Canada, is 11 years older, and I was shipped off here as his bride. So I was 18 when I arrived here as his wife and became a mother right away. So I was a teenage mom, and I was confined at home, not allowed to go to school, not allowed to have an education for many years. And at that time, now that I know when I look back, that the abuse had started from day one, because abuse is about power and control, and a lot of times the scars are invisible. So it started with a lot of the verbal abuse, name calling, you're worthless, you're useless, you're good for nothing. And when you hear that on a daily basis, you start believing that. So when you hear that I don't respect you because you're not worthy of respect, and you internalize it, and you're hearing it from your partner and his family, and you just start to believe that about yourself. So over the years, when the physical violence did start and the bruises appeared on my body, I believed, yeah, that's my fault too, because that's how I was conditioned. And that's really how it starts. And so over a decade, there was a lot of emotional abuse, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, and ultimately physical abuse and sexual abuse as well. So and yes, there were many times when I tried to leave, and then I would go back because of the structural abuse, like I call it. It's the violence that society inflicts on you, because when you try to speak up, when you try to leave, the sentence you hear is, a good wife stays quiet, a good wife tolerates, a good wife tries to make it work. It's your job to stay and protect the family honor. And I know that Dawn and JoAnne were talking about the patriarchy that's built in, and it's just, and it's across the board. It's across different cultures, because you see it in different ways and shapes and forms. And that's the misogyny and the patriarchy that's just ingrained.
You have a book called The Good Wife. It's
A Good
coming
Wife,
out.
yeah.
And you also wrote an article for the Toronto Life that I was reading on the GO train and crying, because I think your story is one of perseverance. When did you know that the life that you were living, it was abusive? When did you know that you were living in an abusive relationship?
It was actually after 10 years of marriage and 10 years of abuse. The one thing that even during those 10 years I was not willing to give up on was my education. So I finished my high school courses through distance learning at home, because I was not allowed to go to a regular school, and then worked as a babysitter and tutor to save money, because I was not allowed to go out and get a job.
And you had 2 kids.
And I had 2 kids. And but that sort of light and hope that one day I'll be able to go to school sort of kept me going. So when I started university at the age of 26, after I had 2 children and after almost 10 years of marriage, is when my world started to open up. I was finally being treated with kindness and respect when I would go to school, and I would make friends, and my professors would want to talk to me, and I was like, really, like me? You know?
You were seeing yourself through the eyes of other people and
Absolutely.
not through the eyes of your abuser.
Yes.
Looking back now, what could have made it easier for you to leave sooner, or be able to identify what was going on in your life?
I think just awareness of what are my rights, what is out there, what are my choices. So that awareness came to me when I went to UTM, and I was a student there, and I came across the Health and Counseling Center one day, and the board there just kind of spoke to me, and I went in and made an appointment, and finally somebody said to me, it's not your fault. No matter what you do not deserve to be abused. There are options, there are choices, there are pathways. It's not going to be all doomsday when you leave. You're not going to be, chewed up and spit out at the side of the road, left to die. There is hope, and that's kind of that hope that I needed to latch on. So if I had that awareness before, if I got it from somewhere else, way before I started university, then I could have left sooner. I probably would have. But I didn't really believe that there was any chance of me being able to survive on my own.
And also probably, I need to ask about the impact of children, because you had children.
Yeah.
And JoAnne, you see women who are trying to leave domestic violence. And I think one of the things that we've talked about is maybe not having the economic means to leave a relationship when you have kids. What kind of impact does this have on children?
Well, I think for a very long time, moms especially believed that they were doing their very best to keep their children safe, and that children were not necessarily aware of what was going on around them, that the abuse was happening in the bedroom, it was happening at night, that children didn't know the impact. But indeed, what we know now, more so, is that indeed children are impacted, that they know much more than we have ever believed that they did know, and that they begin to understand. Sometimes they become protectors of their mom, sometimes they become protectors of their smaller children in the home, and that as they age and mature, then their understanding of what gender role stereotypes are often informed by the abuse that happens in the home. So sometimes children take on the role of the abuser because that's the role that they've seen all the time. Sometimes they take on the role of the person who is abused. And then you see that going forward through life as well. And so children definitely are impacted and definitely need intervention as well.
We've been talking a little bit about policy. We only have a few minutes left. It's flown by really quickly. And I wanted to talk about policy, Farrah. You've been involved in both the provincial and federal levels in trying to find ways to end gender-based violence. What do you think is missing from the puzzle?
Well, I think in Ontario, we have a great disservice that's happened in this province by the disbanding of the Ontario Roundtable on Violence Against Women. It was an opportunity to bring multiple people to the table, from labor, student organizations, violence against women, domestic violence, sexual violence, together and looking at this issue. We had the Aboriginal Women's Shelters Network on there. Like, the thing is that this issue, what we know is that women go to multiple services to get support. They don't just go to a shelter, they're going to a counseling space, they're going to a sexual assault center. They go to 5 to 7 different services, and all the services need to be funded. And right now what we're seeing is a piecemeal of funding of only maybe domestic violence, like sexual violence is this dirty little sister secret, and we can't do that.
You can't separate the two.
You cannot, and you actually need to support that. And I know that sexual assault centers are still waiting to find out what's happening with the implementation of the Gender-Based Violence Action Plan that was released in March 1st, 2018, and they still haven't received their 33% increase. And there's no sign that that's going to change.
Do you think that this situation, because when new governments come in,
Sure.
they are entitled to focus on what they need to focus on. Do you think this is a partisan issue?
No, and I think that's the thing we have to remind people all the time, that gender-based violence, the murder and femicide of women, the sexual assault of women, the sexual assault of children, right? We know 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 6 men experience sexual violence in their lifetime. That's not a partisan issue. That's a people issue. And if we care about the prosperity of this province and this country, we have to care about this. We know that it costs our economy $12 billion every year. At least that's the status that we got a number of years ago. It's probably more now. It costs us $12 billion a year to not address gender-based violence. It doesn't help our economy. And yes, people can change power. It shouldn't matter what government's in power to recognize that this is a vital issue that needs to be addressed. And that's what makes me nervous. It shouldn't be like because it's trending. Like, you know, Me Too was a really big conversation that happened. But before Me Too was talking about Jian Ghomeshi. And before that, we were talking about other things. Like, it's not like this is not a new conversation. What we do need is every government, from municipal to provincial to federal, to look at this. In Toronto alone, where we are right now, you know, we had a huge mass murder of women during the van attack in April. And during the municipal election, we did not see any of the mayoral candidates speak about misogyny to the extent they needed to make commitments to end gender-based violence. In the federal election that's coming up, I want to make sure that our federal government is speaking about this. And it's not trendy. It doesn't not hurt one community over another. What we're saying is this is vital. People need to live and thrive in this province, in this country.
Samra, I'd like to give you the last word. You were in an abusive relationship. You have a successful life now. What message would you like to share with anyone who may be feeling trapped or in an abusive relationship and is afraid to leave because of their children?
So a couple of things. From my own experience, as well as talking to a lot of people and just educating myself, I know that the impact on children of experiencing or living with family violence, they don't just witness it, they experience it like it's happening to them. The effects of that trauma last forever. And I know that as a parent, that I'm supporting my kids through that, and we're still healing and we're still getting help. And it's, you know, you think that, you know, I don't want to leave because my kids will live in a single parent family, or I don't want to leave because they'll be separated from their father. That, yes, it is difficult for children when parents separate, but the trauma of living with family violence is an everyday thing. And that is much, much more detrimental. So if there's anything I wish or any regret that I have in my life is I wish I could have left sooner for the sake of my children so that they didn't have to experience that growing up. And I think the message is, like, you know, for a lot of women, they reach out and they say, well, it's so difficult to leave. And I will say, yes, it is. it is difficult. It is going to be tough because of just the lack of support, sometimes the lack of awareness, sometimes it's the cultural backlash, because even though violence against women is experienced across communities and cultures, but the experience of it could be quite different, and the cultural nuances are there, and the level of shame and stigma associated with walking away could be different from community to community. Yes, it will be difficult, and it's not going to be easy, and you can still do it. There are going to be support systems. Maybe not all doors will open, but some will. And there are people around you that will rally around you. And you just got to take that responsibility of healing and fighting, and then find the right people to support you and get out of it. And you know, sometimes it's easier said than done, but there is
to take the first step.
Yeah, the first step is the hardest, but it's also the most necessary one.
Samra, thank you so much for sharing your story. Farrah, Dawn, and JoAnne, thank you for the work that you do and for sharing your insights on a really important topic. We appreciate you making the time for the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.